The Predator, directed by Shane Black, who starred in the very first Predator back in 1987. And what a lot of folks don't know is he actually helped write the movie as well. So he's very familiar with the Predator franchise. This is the newest entry into the Predator series, and I'm going to give you my thoughts on this movie, the good, the bad, and whether or not I think you should see it. Now, the first thing I want to get out of the way is that some folks are calling this like a soft reboot, with the idea being that this film is going to start a new trilogy of Predator movies that Shane Black's going to either direct, produce, or both. That's somewhat true here, but this movie is without question a sequel. It not only acknowledges the events of the first two Predator movies, but it also actually adds some lore to the Predator's the actual Predator species. And it adds sort of a new layer and somewhat of a new explanation as to why the Predators do what they do. And I think that's going to give some people mixed results. I think hardcore fans of this franchise might not like that, essentially because of the fact that in the first film, the Predator and what he did was very, very simple and very, I guess you can say macho, but that first movie is a classic and is a total macho movie. I mean, if you've never seen the first Predator, I mean, what are you waiting for? That's one of the Arnold Schwarzenegger classics from 1987. And the series has kind of been, hit or miss. I like Predator 2, I like Predators, and I didn't really like AVP, nor do I count that as part of this main, continuity, the main canon. I feel like this is the fourth Predator movie. Now, is the movie good? What can you expect from this film? So, Shane Black comes in to direct this film, and I was skeptical because I'm not a big fan of what he did with Iron Man 3, where the movie really falls apart in the second half, and there were problems in this movie, especially in the second half. Things get a little too insane. Now, one of the things that people have been talking about, not just from the reviews, because I've tried to avoid reviews, but I've seen some tweets here and there, and I've seen the trailers, is that this movie's too funny. And that is definitely a fact. The thing about Predator 1 and 2 is that those movies were essentially, in a weird way, kind of like sci-fi horror, which is why the Predator and Alien have so much in common, even before they did the whole versus thing. The Predator is like a technologically advanced version of Michael Myers, the way he slaughters and hunts people. And, with this movie, yes, the movie definitely does a lot of comedy. And some of the jokes hit, some of the jokes are absolutely cringy. Some of the humor in the movie is really how can I put it? Just very behind the times. And I'm not saying that from somebody who's trying to be crude, because I love wacky 80s humor. I love 80s comedies, don't get me wrong. But some of the jokes here were really forced, they have your mama jokes in the movie, things like that. And I know why they did it. I thought it was kind of whatever, but that definitely sets it apart from the other Predator movies, because the first couple movies took themselves very seriously, and you're not supposed to laugh except for maybe a couple of scenes here and there. This movie keeps up the comedy from start to finish, and it's just something that we're seeing a lot of lately. Star Wars is doing it, Marvel is doing it. With this movie, in my opinion, it did not take away from the movie as much as it did for other people, as much as it may for other people, but it definitely was something that did turn me off a few times as I'm watching the film. Now, another thing you should know about this movie is that it does try, Shane Black did try to keep the spirit of the first Predator movie in this film. You've got the Alan Silvestri score all throughout the movie, which really popped me. You've kind of got, somewhat of a jungle setting. The movie does combine Predator 1 and 2, because you've got a setting in a town, then you got a setting in the jungle and laboratories and things like that. So, I mean, it does try to go back to basics here. You've got, former Marines and military personnel, snipers. The main character who Boyd Holbrook played, Quinn McKenna, he's pretty much like a sniper, and a very dangerous one at that. So, you've got kind of that whole attempt to go back to basics, but the problem with the movie is that even though I like the actors in it, I really did not care too much about the side characters at all. I mean, they do the same thing where you have the ensemble and they go in to try to fight this thing. And it was cool seeing, for example, Thomas Jane, who plays this guy in the movie who has Tourette's. That was cool. And I liked the character, but outside of that character, I didn't care about anybody else in the movie at all except for Quinn and his son, who's a very important character in the movie, played by Jake Busey. His name is Sean. And his character is essentially a kid who has Asperger's. And they play up the movie to where they sort of take this idea that people who have Asperger's are actually really, really smart, which is true. I mean, there's truth to that in that there are geniuses who have attempts of autism and, who have, disorders, mental disorders, who actually wind up being geniuses. But as I was watching the film, I'm thinking in the back of my head, was this done on purpose to appeal to people or people who know people who have autism and Asperger's, or was it done as part of the plot? It really didn't bother me, but I was just wondering in the back of my head, because nowadays these Hollywood movies always have an agenda, it seems, right? Like they always have some kind of subtle message in them, and I'm wondering if that was the idea, because in the movie he plays a crucial role because of the fact that he has a form of autism and he's getting bullied and whatnot. And to me, it also was something that I felt was a little bit unrealistic, because yeah, I understand that, of course, in the real world, there are a lot of smart prodigies that are kids, but the fact that this kid is, like, in this movie, smarter than some of the scientists, that's a little hard to swallow. I'm sorry, but I'm having a hard time accepting that this kid is smarter than scientists. I mean, that when you start doing things like that, you're starting to go into Independence Day resurgence territory here, and yeah, I didn't want that, but it didn't go all the way there. Now, what I liked about the film is that and I should tell you this ahead of time, it's extremely gory. This is a very violent movie. I mean, there's dudes getting disemboweled, there's limbs being cut off, impalings, there's people getting literally ripped to shreds. I mean, like decapitations, lots of blood. This isn't, if you are like queasy about blood, this might not be the movie for you, but I'm sure most of you guys probably like that kind of stuff, knowing my audience. So, no, I mean, the movie's completely nuts when it comes to violence. It's very violent. Probably the most violent movie I've seen this year. Even more than Death Wish, I would say. Even more than Infinity War, as far as actual gore goes. Obviously, Shane Black was purposely going for that because the first Predator is very gory, too. And there were times in the movie where I was thinking, okay, does this go too far? Is it to the point where it's kind of like you can't take it seriously? Like, is it so gory to where it becomes a clown show? And the answer is no, with the exception of one scene where there's a decapitation, which was a cool scene. I mean, I dug it, but as I'm watching it, I'm like, yeah, that might have been a little too much. We're starting to go into cartoon, like Tom and Jerry kind of territory here. Or actually Itchy and Scratchy, because Itchy and Scratchy's way more violent than Tom and Jerry. You know what I'm saying? One of the problems with the movie is that I felt like things happened in the film. And for the first half of the movie, it's weird, okay? So for the first half of the movie, they kind of over-explain things. They actually, like, literally over-explain things that should kind of be more subtle, and they kind of spoon feed you information. For example, there's a whole conversation with Olivia Munn's character. We're going to get to that here in a minute about my problems with her character. She's a biologist, and they pretty much tell you everything you need to know about the Predators. Not everything, but a lot of information in the first, 15 minutes of the movie. Like, very early on, they tell you this in the laboratory scene. And it becomes something where I'm watching it and I'm like, yeah, you didn't have to explain all that. Like, she's like, that's alien technology. Yeah, duh. Like, we know that already. It does kind of do that. But then closer to the end of the movie, it does the exact opposite to where it doesn't tell you anything. Like, you have characters who are switching sides between being good guys and villains with no rhyme or reason. Like, I get why it happened, but it was so quick and sudden. Like, it's almost like Shane Black was just like, you know what, who cares? Let's just change this character's motivations now for the sake of the plot, for the sake of getting to point B. And that's always, to me, very sloppy writing. So not only is the plot a bit sloppy, but like I said earlier, the jokes are too. It's almost like they were trying to recapture that really, I guess, macho 80s kind of, vibe, I guess you can say. But it wound up coming off more immature than it did, like, macho 80s. Like, if you watch a movie like Expendables, right? I think Expendables perfectly captured that 80s kind of cheesy, super muscular hero, military badass thing. This movie tried, but it didn't work. And I think part of the reason is because Boyd Holbrook, who's not a bad actor, I don't think, he doesn't seem too intimidating, whereas when you have Arnold, he's ripped to shreds, he's a badass. And I'm not saying that Quentin McKenna's not a badass in this movie, but he doesn't come off like somebody who has that cheese. You know, there's not that many cool one-liners. They do throw a lot of homages to the first film. Get to the choppers, a scene that we hear in this, or a line that we hear in this movie from the first film. You know, they discuss some things from the first film. So that was all good and well, but overall, it's not going to hold a torch to that first movie. But to be honest with you, I enjoyed it. Like, I actually liked this movie. I had a fun time because it was just a fun romp. That's pretty much what it was. But there were a lot of problems plot-wise and joke-wise. But the movie itself did not bore me. I mean, it picks up relatively quickly. I was invested. I could kind of see where they were going with some of the stuff. There was a lot of things that I thought were very unrealistic. Not just the fact that the kid with the autism is smarter than a damn scientist, but also Olivia Munn's character. I talked about this earlier. She goes from being this kind of normal, intelligent biologist to being this superhero by the end of the movie who's this action star. I mean, she like almost becomes Psylocke in a way. Like, that was freaking... No, like, and I get why they did it, because they wanted to have, like, a male and a female protagonist, both kind of being equals in a way, but I can't believe that Olivia Munn, who's a former science teacher and a biologist, is as, you know, skilled in combat as a freaking sniper army ranger. I can't buy that. If they had said that Olivia Munn was a former military personnel, former soldier, okay, like, that's cool. It's not about her being a girl, because I'm not sexist. It's one of those things where they never tell us that she is a badass. She just becomes a badass. So she kind of becomes, I hate to use it, but she becomes a bit of a Mary Sue. I mean, not as bad as Rey from Star Wars, but she does do things in the last, you know, act of the film where I'm like, yo, like, that's a little too much right there. The kills in the movie were very gory, very creative. Not as creative as I would have hoped, but still, you know, fun. And it's one of those things where, you know, it's got problems, but I can't say I hate this movie. I really can't. I really can't say I hate it. There's cheesiness to it. There's bad things about it, but I had a good time watching it. Now, for those of you who have not checked out the Geekdom 101 podcast, I'm going to leave a link down below. You got to check out my new podcast. It's on iTunes, Google Play, Apple Podcasts. Next week's episode, we're going to be doing a complete retrospective on the Predator franchise. We're going to be reviewing the first film, second film, you know, all the movies. That's coming up next week on the Geekdom 101 podcast. But I'm going to leave a link so you guys can subscribe to it if you have Apple Podcasts and check out the episodes I've already uploaded. I've got 5 episodes so far, and episode 6 is going to be covering the older Predator movies. So that's going to be a fun time. So getting back to the movie, there were some cool things that they tried. For example, we see humans using some of the Predator tech. That was cool. We see, I don't want to spoil too much, but we see kind of Predator on Predator violence. We see more of the Predator tech, like their craft, their ships, things like that. You know, we see these things in the film. So they did try new things. I just don't know. Like, this movie is dangerously close to going into, like, Ghosts of Mars, cheesy sci-fi. Like, this should be on Sci-Fi Channel and not in theaters to kind of, they're really on edge here. I personally did not think they crossed it, but the jokes were a bit much, and again, it's not a perfect movie. It's like a 3-star movie, 3 out of 5, I would say. But if you're looking for a fun romp, and if you like really violent movies that don't take themselves seriously and are kind of meta, I mean, there's a lot of meta stuff in this movie, too. There's a whole discussion, which actually is funny because me and Mike talked about this in the podcast coming out next week. We already recorded it. They talk about how the word predator is not apropos to this alien. And it was so funny because the word predator is usually given to an animal that, you know, killed its prey to live, not for sport. And in the movie they're even like, oh, we should call it the Hunter, which is actually the original name of Predator. Like, the original name of the first movie was going to be called The Hunter, and they changed to the Predator. So it's almost like they're doing that kind of meta, self-referential stuff in the film. If you like that kind of stuff, I mean, you'll love it. If you don't like it, you're not going to like it. But they did discuss that in the movie, which I thought was very interesting. And there's apparently like another cut of this film where Edward James Olmos is in the movie. There's a whole other subplot with Edward James Olmos playing some kind of a military guy that was cut from the movie completely. Like, they had to cut it to make the movie shorter. So I'm thinking it's very possible that they're going to possibly, you know, release like an extended cut, and I'm wondering if that'll make the movie better or worse. I really am, because this is right there. This is a movie that's right on the borderline of being good and being bad. Like, it's right in the middle. There's good stuff, there's wacky stuff that I find fun to watch, but there's also a lot of cringy stuff too, dude. Like, it's really right in the middle. And also, speaking of deleted scenes, there was a whole subplot with the actor Steve Wilder, and what ended up happening was, before the movie came out, Steve Wilder is a registered sex offender. He molested a 14-year-old girl, and Olivia Munn found out about it and complained, and then they cut all his scenes. So I don't know if we're ever going to get that cut. So this movie's got all kinds of weird production issues, like things like that. But overall, like I said, I'm going to say thumbs in the middle, slightly up if you like over-the-top, you know, violence, and if you're a fan of the franchise, you should go see the movie. It does have somewhat of a cliffhanger ending to lead up to sequels. It's not a cliffhanger, but it does, you know, the story's not over yet, essentially. But we'll see if the movie will warrant a sequel, because I really don't think critics are going to like this movie at all. It's just not a movie for them. But that doesn't mean that other people can't find enjoyment in it. And it was enjoyable, but there's a lot of weird stuff and a lot of stupid stuff in the movie as well. There's a lot of dumb shit in this movie, dude. So if you can get past the dumb shit and just enjoy the romp, check out the movie. That is it. Those are my thoughts. Remember to check out the Geekdom 101 podcast, and I'll talk to you all soon, okay?